Okay, maybe I've deleted enough stuff of the phone. Okay, if I get this warning again, it's fine. I just need to shut up. Anyways, so the Angels of Mons event, this happens. Angels apparently come down from the sky, protect the British Army from during their retreat from the Germans, so they're able to remain organized for the rest of the war. But Mons is where that first happens, and it's also where on November 11th of 1918, the war ends. So the Canadian Expeditionary Force actually retakes, during the 100 Days, pretty much all of the land that was sort of lost during the war from, I want to say, like Amiens to Mons. But on November 11th, the Canadian Army ends at Mons. So, which Remembrance Day is that the last soldier of the war to die was actually here in Mons. They were part of the CEF. I think his name was George Price. I could be wrong about that. But he was the last person to die, and that was like 2 minutes before armistice happened. Which, like, could you imagine the luck of that? The odds? I'd be pretty mad. I'd be pretty mad. I would honestly be pretty mad. Anyway, so you come into town, you get off at the train station. It's a very, it's a walled city, so it's kind of small. It's very easy to walk around. But yeah, I went down into the Grand Place. I went and I saw I forget the name of the tower in the center of town is. There's a whole bunch of murals and stuff around the town that they've painted for different reasons. I went to it's called the Water Machine Museum, but it's it's the La Machine à l'eau, the Water Machine Museum, which used to be like a mill in the town, but now it's where they have all the military history in the town, because it's like forever. This town has been overrun by different people for different reasons, going in different directions. And yeah, so it was really interesting to go there and to see this place where World War I started and World War I ended, especially having gone to all the French sort of sites in the Somme the previous year. And that was a really interesting experience. So I did that. That was one day, and then the next day, what is this? So then the next day, I went to Ypres, and I took the train up to Ypres. You have to transfer on the way, but I got to Ypres, and that was very cool. Ypres is where the poem In Flanders Fields was written by John McCrae, who was a doctor from the Canadian Army. He had gone to medical school and worked as a doctor briefly in Montreal. I think he was originally from somewhere in southern Ontario. But yeah, he went. He was trained in Montreal, and then he went off with the Canadian Expeditionary Force, and he wrote this poem. And so you can actually still go to the bunker that he was doing operations in, and you can walk through it when you're there, and they have all these memorials about the poem and him and John McCrae as well there. It's very interesting. There's also a graveyard that is full of mostly like Welsh soldiers, and there's another monument to something else, but this was like the front line, because where the canal was, as soon as you crossed over it, that was where sort of the front line developed on that side of town. And I remember you had to walk out of town, so you had to walk into the town and then out of the town for, I don't know, I'm gonna say like 20 minutes or so. But it was very interesting to go and to see that, and to like be able to walk into the actual bunker that he would have performed operations in. Amazing. I went back into town. I went to like the church in the town, and then I went to the Cloth Hall, I believe is what it's called, which is the main sort of building in the town, and they have a museum of the town's history as well as a museum of just World War One history there. Ypres was like the most multicultural of all of the battlefields. It hosted the most soldiers from the most different nations there, and it really just saw the entirety of the war. And so it was very interesting to get to go do that, to not only do the previous sort of history of the town, which apparently one of the founding legends of the town is that it might actually have like a connection to, I think Troy is one of them and Palestine is the other one. It's also the city of cats. It is like the city of cloth, and they also, I think, are said to have like a Celtic connection of some kind. There's a lot of like history that's being wrapped up in that little place. It's fascinating. And then even just like the medieval history section of that museum was really, really cool because like medieval history is often overlooked as being like drab and boring, but actually like there's a lot of like raunchy stuff that's going on at that point in time, because it's like these are just people who are like trying to find like some joy in their life like people are now, you know. So it's not like things were that different. Maybe they just weren't as accessible as they are now. But yeah, like all of that was really cool to get to go see. Of course, because I was there, one of the things that you should do if you do go to Ypres is stay for the nighttime ceremony. Every single night of the year, they have a ceremony at the Menin Gate. And so I went over to the Menin Gate. I had dinner at there's the Captain James Cook restaurant there, which is interesting. And I was like, I've now been to most of these places outside of like Tahiti. That's probably the last one that I would go to. So like I've been to most of these places. Yeah, Captain James Cook restaurant, why not? We'll eat there. And then I went to I did stop in at the Commonwealth War Graves Commission for a little bit and talk to the guy at the booth, and then he gave me the information about, you know, staying for the nightly last post ceremony. So then I did that. That was really cool, because yeah, you go into underneath the actual gate, and the local fire department comes out and they have a nightly wreath laying ceremony and they play the last post and a bunch of other things. It's very interesting. I was there and I met there's this school group that was on a trip, and I met all these kids who were like going to a bunch of the different battle sites as like a school group trip, and they were from, I think, North London, and it was really fun to like talk to them, and like they were super jazzed about the whole thing, and I was like, okay, this is cool. Because like usually, I mean, you would think kids wouldn't be that interested, but they seemed pretty interested, so that was cool. And then from there I went back into Brussels, and then I went from Brussels to, I day tripped out to Antwerp, which was really cool as well. I really liked Antwerp, but I also found it to be a little confusing, but that's also because I was only there for like one day, and it is a very big city in comparison to like Ypres and Mons, which you can easily do in one day, whereas Antwerp is, there's a lot more going on because it is a big city. Makes sense. But yeah, Antwerp was cool. I enjoyed that. And then I spent the last day, I went back to Brussels. The last couple days I was in Brussels, and when I was there, I did a couple things. That's not what I'm looking for. Yeah, I did a couple things. I went to the House of European History one of the days when I was there, which was really cool. It was on Rue Belliard, Billiardstraat, which I thought was really fun because it was also like across the street from the Japanese embassy, and Belliard is one of the potential spellings of my last name, which I thought was very humorous, and I chuckled when I saw that. But it was really cool because it spanned the entire history of Europe. It wasn't just Belgian specific. So that was really cool. Another thing that I went to that was neat was the Musical Instrument Museum. I guess it's more interesting if you like pianos and stuff like that, because that was mostly what the instruments that they focused on there were. But they did have other things. They had guitars and different horns and things like that. But yeah, it was cool. I found it to be really cool. It was inside the Old England Hotel, which I thought was very funny. And it was also near Billiardstraat. And what else was there that was really cool? Oh, that's what it was. Yeah, sorry. When I went to, when I was in Antwerp, I went to Die Cathedral, which is, it has a different name. It's the Arcathedral. No, that's not it. It has an actual name, but it has all these Peter Paul Rubens paintings in it. And what I thought was so cool about this was in sort of the center of Antwerp, and right out front of it was a statue that was Nello and something or other. And it was a kid sleeping with a dog in a statue. 18. Yep. Anyways, it was this kid sleeping with a statue of a dog, and it was something in Nello. And it made me think of, yeah, here he is. Pastiche. Nello and Patrache. Nello and Patrache. And that made me think of our dogs. When I was growing up, we had two dogs. We had Nell and Seamus. Seamus and Nell were the name of our dogs. And we gave Seamus away, and we kept Nell. And I think my dad named them after some story that he'd read. But anyways, I thought that was really interesting to begin with. And then I walked in, and then I was given this free pamphlet. And the first thing that I saw in the pamphlet was this poem, which is The Skylight by Seamus Heaney. And I thought this was really interesting because, well, first of all, I just seen Nell, and now I was running into a Seamus. And the first place that I went to internationally after COVID was Ireland. And when I got to Ireland, one of the first things that I found on that trip was an exhibit on the work of Irish poet Seamus Heaney, who was from Northern Ireland originally, but he naturalized to Republic of Ireland. And so I'd gotten a collection of his poetry and had read it. And so it was really crazy to walk in here. But then also, it was the poem is about a man who's living in a house where he has these skylights in it, and he's lowered down through these skylights, and I was like, that's really wild, because where I had lived in Montreal had two skylights. So yeah, I just thought that was all really fascinating, and that really just kind of stood out to me. But yeah, they have all these Peter Paul Rubens paintings in it, and they've connected them all to different verses of poetry, and there's a larger guidebook that I ended up getting from it that has the fuller poems in them. But it was really cool, this melding of religion and poetry and visual art and painting and stuff like that. And I just thought that was it was a unique sort of way to present that stuff, and so I really enjoyed that about Antwerp. That was my favorite thing that I saw when I was there. So then I went back to Brussels the last day I was in Brussels, and I decided to go to Heysel Stadium, because Heysel was one of the... Liverpool has unfortunately been involved in two sort of stadium crushing incidents, one of which was at Heysel, and so I determined to go out to it. And when I got there, I got off the subway, and there was a mad crush of people, and it was hard to exit the stadium exit the subway station. And I was like, "What's going on?" And then I got up top, and then I saw all these people walking around with papal flags and Belgian flags, and I was like, "This is weird. What's going on?" And then I walked around the actual stadium because I couldn't get into it because there had been an event there, and it turns out that the Pope had been there that morning to do an open air ceremony for the Belgian royal family or something like that, and I had just happened to catch the end of it, or the exiting of all the people from it, and so like that was really interesting to me. And from there, I decided to then go to the Atominium exhibit nearby, which was sort of like they hosted a World Expo at one point in time in like the 50s or something. And it was just cool to like go into like this building that was like set up as the model of like an atom or something like that. Pretty cool building, pretty interesting exhibit inside. And there was actually an exhibit by a Quebec photographer named I want to say Yves Cadillo, about like she had photographed all of the previous sort of World Expo locations that have now been abandoned. And yeah, it was very kind of like apocalyptic, but also like really interesting because some of them, like nature has started to take back these places in really interesting ways. So that was cool to see. And then, yeah, that was it. That was sort of the end of my traveling. And then I went back to Montreal briefly. And I finally, when I, had moved out of Montreal, briefly on my way to Vancouver for a bit, decided to finally stop in at the Notre Dame de Bon Secours, which is it's the Mariners Church, or it's known also as the Mariners Church. And I remember when I first moved there, I had talked to my landlord about it, and they were like, I talked to them about things I should check out in town. They're like, you have to go to this place because like you might like it. There's like models of ships and stuff inside. And I was like, oh, okay, that's weird, but sure. I mean, I live here. I don't need to go to it immediately. So I finally went to it after I didn't live in Montreal anymore. I was on the way to someplace else. And it was cool. It was very cool. It is home to Montreal's patron saint, Marguerite, I'm going to pronounce her name wrong because I always do this, but Bourgeois. And yeah, she's like a patron saint of Montreal, essentially. There's a little monument or a little like icon of some kind that is with her, and it was made in Belgium, and it was made out of wood from a forest in Belgium that's like half an hour outside of Brussels or something like that, which is pretty interesting as like a little capstone to all these little things that happened along the way. But yeah, it was kind of neat to finally go in there and to like see this and like learn all these things. And yeah, it was sort of the Mariners Church because it was the first place that you would enter into in Old Montreal when you got off the ships on the docks and stuff. So that's why it was known as that. But yeah, this little statuette, this thing, is made from wood that is from just outside of Belgium, or just outside of Brussels. And so I thought that was kind of cool. But yeah, that's all of that stuff. Yeah, just random maps and brochures and things like that really don't hold a lot of interest for anybody. But I guess the other thing that I didn't show, that I could show, is this. Here it is. Okay, yeah, this was the expo. This was the Angels of Mons expo that I went to. And it was really cool because it was about the idea of how like faith develops in times of like great crisis like that, and the things that people use as how faith can sometimes transition into superstition, if you will, and like how items start to carry great importance. So they talked about things that like soldiers would collect during the war, and I'll show you some of those things in a moment. But yeah, Essex Farm Cemetery is the John McCrae site that's the name of that. So that's Essex Farm, which I walked out to in the rain, which was fine. Menindee is where you can go to actually get to see the nighttime last post ceremony. Outside of it, there's a really cool art exhibit that somebody had made of like key moments of the Great War, to sort of tell the story of what was happening. And then when I was at the museum, the World War I museum, I ended up picking up a couple things. One was this thing about the Canadian soldier, and this is just a book about Canada's war efforts during the entirety of the war. And it covers like everything from, yeah, like it even has like a section on Courcelette, which not a lot of things do. Some people do, some people don't, but that's there. And then also Canada and Flanders was a thing that I picked up, which was really cool because I liked that it had all of the different regimental cap badges as a means of sort of understanding how to identify people from a photo and like where these units were from and where they ended up being. But yeah, all of that was like very interesting and very cool to do. And as I said, like it was interesting to then learn along the way about members of my family who had served in the Great War. I had at least 3 members of my family who did serve in the Great War in different capacities, and then to learn about the other connections that they had with other places that I had been to. And all of that was just sort of like mind melting to some extent, because like you don't think about all of these things or like how all of that connects together. Growing up in what was sort of like a first childhood home in Canada of Canada's first prime minister who built the railroad, that also instituted policies that created a legacy of generational trauma for Indigenous Canadians, for Indigenous peoples in Canada, and having an ancestor who served in a railroad regiment in the Great War that could trace its history back to Batoche, to moving to Montreal and living in Griffintown, which was where a lot of railroad workers lived when they were there, to having taken the railroad across Canada during Canada 150 and getting to see the country for the first time that sort of way. And sometimes my brain gets overwhelmed with all the things that I have to remember, but it's like with all the things that I do remember of it actually. But yeah, like all of those connections, all based around like the railroad essentially. Yeah, it's pretty nuts to sit down and think about sometimes. But that's just a small story of my family's history to some extent. But yeah, how all that ties in with like France and Belgium, and then obviously like the UK and stuff like that. It's kind of interesting. Yeah. Anyways, I'm gonna stop this. I'm gonna make a different video of some different stuff.